So thank you so much for joining us. His Grace Radhika Ramana Prabhuji, all over to you.
Thank you so much, Vallabhari Prabhu, for that kind introduction. I was just marveling actually this morning how rare it is for me to speak to an audience of all men. I think maybe a couple occasions to brahmachari ashrams in India, but other than that, it's a rare opportunity. And so I really want to thank Anuttama Prabhu, Bhakti Marg Maharaj, and others who have organized and have been organizing these events, how special they are, and what an important opportunity they are for men in our movement. And I'm grateful to be participating today. In many ways, Zoom and the pandemic have kept us apart. In some ways, they have brought us together, and I'm able to be present this year, particularly because of this virtual format. And I look forward to hearing presentations from others and learning from them and learning from all of you today as well. So thank you so much for this opportunity. Om Jnana Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So as Vallabhari Prabhu said, I want to approach this topic, meeting the mentor, this step in the hero's journey, which you've heard all about yesterday from really the expert on this topic, Yogeshwar Prabhu. But I want to approach this theme from two directions, not only meeting the mentor, but being the mentor. And both directions simply because each one of us in our lives will sooner or later be asked and have the opportunity to serve in both capacities, as the mentee and as the mentor. And so I want to look at it from both directions. We'll look at some examples from Srimad Bhagavatam, from Caitanya-caritamrta. I'll just start by saying how important this particular step is for the Vedic tradition in general, for Vaishnavism in particular. I can hardly think of a tradition I know that puts more emphasis on mentorship, on guruship, on teachers and students, all the way back from the Vedas and the Upanishads, going down to the present day. In fact, our central scripture, Bhagavad Gita, is born from a conflict that involves the struggle of how do I fight with my own mentors. Yes, Arjuna is conflicted about his relatives and conflicted about his friends being present there. But his deepest conflict, as we see in the first two chapters of the Gita, has to do with the fact that he will have to pick up arms against his mentors. And when he spells out his worries in chapter 1, Krishna comes back in chapter 2 and says, Klaibhyam masma gama partha naitattvaya upapadyate. He says, Arjuna, step up and be a man. That's the best way to translate that word klaibhyam, right? Klaibhyam means you're being impotent. You're not being a man. Step up and do your duty. And Arjuna's response to that accusation from Krishna is very direct and clear. He says, Katham bhishmam aham sankhe dronam cha madhusudana. Gurun ahatva hi mahanubhava. Krishna, how do you want me to kill Bhishma and Drona? He mentions the two people in his life who have been the greatest mentors for him consistently. Bhishma is too far back he's a forefather. He's not, it's difficult to call him a grandfather in a literal sense because he's much further back. But he played such an important role as a mentor, specifically in Arjuna's life. And then Drona, his teacher in the martial arts. And so in the next verse, he says, Gurun ahatva hi mahanubhavan. You're asking me to kill my teachers, my gurus, my mentors. And that's That's Arjuna's comeback to Krishna saying, be a man. He says, really? This is your definition of what manhood is to kill and fight your own teachers? This is ridiculous. And when he rejects Krishna's first attempt to inspire him, that's when Krishna knows, okay, things are serious. If I'm going to get someone to fight with his own teacher, I better have a good argument. It's going to take some work to convince. So just to point out that, I mean, the question of our relationship with a mentor is the very question that gives birth to our most central scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. That's how important this step is of meeting the mentor for our entire tradition, for the entire Vedic tradition. So let's start with a story. When we all know the Ramayana, when Sugriva sends different parties of monkeys to search for Mother Sita in different directions of India. He sends one party to the south. And that's the most important one because they know, they have a rough idea that Sita is probably down south because that's the direction they've seen her go. And so Hanuman goes in that party, Jambavan, Angad, Nal, Neel, all the greatest warriors of Sugriva's army, and the wisest go south. And as they make their journey and they search every cave and every forest and every city and town, they finally end up at a dead end, which is the southern tip of India, Rameshwaram. And there, as they face the great ocean before them, knowing by this point that Sita Devi is probably across the sea on an island of Lanka, they don't know what to do. How do we get across and see her and verify where she is and in what state she is? And so they each think of doing what monkeys do best, which is jump and swing, right? And so each one tests their jump and says, well, I could probably get across the sea, but I wouldn't have enough strength to get back. Or I could get halfway there, but that's no good because halfway is as good as not going when you're crossing the ocean. And each one is, trying their strength out and trying to figure things out, coming up with solutions. It's a big debate. There is one monkey who is absent from this discussion, and that's Hanuman, who is out in a corner under a large boulder or a crag, and he's deep lost in thought. He's sulking because he's been given this mission by Ram himself. He knows he's supposed to do this because Lord Ram had given him the ring, right? And he feels like he's going to fail. At that point, the ancient and divine bear, Jambavan, comes to him and says, Hanuman, what are you doing? Why are you forgetting who you are? This is one of the most important things that happens in this step of meeting the mentor. Again and again, whether you read popular stories in the secular world or you hear religious ones, the mentor often asks this person who is now going to become the mentee to meet themselves, to face who they are. And at this point, Jambavan says, Hanuman, you're forgetting who you are. You are the repository of great strength and energy and power, mystic power. You are the recipient of great boons and blessings that you have received from your father and from the Devas. Remember who you are. And as Hanuman is hearing this, his memory returns, his strength increases, and he rises to the occasion. And he climbs up to the peak of the highest mountain on that shore, and with a great call, Jai Shri Ram, jumps across the ocean. Valmiki Muni describes this so beautifully. As he jumps across, the force of his jump is so great that the mountain shudders and shakes below him. And all the trees, which are loaded with beautiful white flowers, the flowers fall off, get caught up in the wind behind Hanuman's jump, and they follow him for some distance, making him look like a comet streaking across the sky. Now, think about what Jambavan did. This is really the key characteristic of a mentor, of an effective mentor. He saw the potential in his student, in his mentee, and inspired him to reach that potential in the service of a greater goal. Right? I'll say that again. Meeting your mentor, finding a mentor. A mentor means someone who sees the potential in you and has the ability to inspire you to reach that potential in the service of a greater goal. Greater than who you are and greater than who the mentor is. Both directions, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. But one of the greatest pitfalls of a mentor, both meeting one and being one, is when the mentor focuses everything on themselves, right? No, the idea is the mentor points you to a goal that is greater than both of you, both the mentor and the mentee, and inspires you to reach that goal. Now, we see this pattern again and again in relation to Krishna and Arjuna, Hanuman and Jambavan, and many other examples we give. From this mentor, once that initial contact or relationship is established, if we look at these accounts in the scriptures, we find that mentors repeatedly give the mentee two important things, many things actually, but there's two things that I want to highlight here. One is, the first is humility, and the other is confidence, strength. Now, on the one hand, the teacher shows us all the ways in which we need to improve. Hanuman, your sulking in the background here is insufficient. You are capable of more. You're not performing your duty. Arjuna, you're acting like someone who's weak. Stand up and fight. A teacher, by nature, a guru is grave, is heavy, has the capacity to show the student where they need to improve, to recognize their weaknesses, recognize their strengths, and say, this is how you can do better. So on the one hand, the mentor brings us face to face with our own shortcomings. And this can be a jarring experience. It can be a difficult experience, a frightening one, because the scariest person to meet is ourselves, right? We on Halloween, which we just passed, people dress up in scary forms, put on masks, become people who they are not, and try to scare others. But really, the scariest person we can meet is our own selves, because we find all kinds of things that are difficult to trust, things worth fearing, sides of ourselves we didn't want to know. And when the mentor brings us face to face with ourselves, it can be a frightening experience. It's definitely going to be a humbling experience. And so the mentor engenders, creates this humility in us. But that's not enough, because if that's all the mentor does, is bring about humility, bring us face to face with our shortcomings, the teacher is just going to break our backs. We won't have the strength to stand up and pick ourselves up and accomplish what we need to. We wouldn't have the strength to move beyond ourselves, to achieve the goals that we are meant to achieve. And so along with that humility, equally important is that the mentor instills confidence in the student, saying that not only do you need to do this, but you can do this. You do have the strength to do this. Now, here's the key thing. Confidence, the ability to instill confidence in someone, is born of trust in that person. When Mrigari meets Narada Muni, and Narada Muni shows him the reality of what he is doing by half killing those animals, it's scary, right? It's frightening for Mrigari. Like we said, meeting yourself is scary. He's recognizing what kind of person he is or he has become as a result of this gratuitous cruelty that he's put these poor animals through. He's trembling, he's scared. And when Narada Muni brings himself face to face with himself, he gives him a challenge. He says, break your bow. Stop doing what you're doing. This is not right. Why in the world should Mrigari give up his only means of livelihood because he's met a random person in the forest? No one is going to take steps. Why should Hanuman try to jump across the ocean, jump across the sea? Now, that's a risky business, right? That's dangerous. What if you run out of fuel or energy halfway across the journey? What if you meet demons along the way, which he certainly did? Why would Hanuman do what Jambavan is asking? How does Jambavan succeed in instilling confidence in Hanuman? It's because Hanuman trusts Jambavan. It's because there's something that Mrigari sees in Narada Muni that builds his trust, that instills trust in him. And Caitanya-caritamrta describes this beautifully. The character of Narada Muni, his presence, his brilliance, his words that instill that trust. So confidence is born of trust. And trust is born of the truth, of honesty. When we meet someone who we see is telling us the truth, who is speaking honestly with nothing to gain from themselves or to get from you, we automatically gain trust in that person. When we meet someone who tells us the truth, and the reason the truth is so powerful is because truth is swata pramana, it's self-evident. Any person, even someone who half kills animals for pleasure and watches them, takes pleasure in their torturous pain, even someone with that kind of character, when they meet someone who speaks the truth to them, there's something in them. They have a capacity to respond to that truth. Why? Because truth is svata pramana. It's self-evident. Confidence is born of trust. Trust is born of truth, and truth is self-evident. This is why again and again in the scriptures, when we find definitions of gurus, the first thing we hear and the most consistent thing we hear is that they see and speak the truth. Tad viddhi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnanam jnaninas tattvadarshinaha. This is a person who sees the truth, tattva. Kiba Vipra, Kiba Nyasi, Shudra Kenenai, Jai Krishna, Tattva Veta, Shai Guru Hai. one who knows the truth of Krishna, that person is Guru. Doesn't matter whether they're a sannyasi, whether they are a grihastha, what gender, caste, whatever they might be, right? If they know the truth, if they speak the truth of Krishna, they are Guru. Now, we often take tattva or truth in these verses in philosophical terms only, right? They know the philosophy and they can speak it. And that, of course, is crucial, right? Truth means, tattvadarshi means someone who knows the philosophy. But we often forget the other side. The word tattva means truth, and truth means honesty. This is also a statement of that person's, not just their philosophical wisdom, but their character, their ability to be honest, their ability to engender trust in others. Okay, so confidence and humility, right? Two things that we get from a mentor. And the balance between these two things is so crucial for the mentee, for the student. Perhaps you know the story of Raghunath Das Goswami and Sri Chaitanya in Caitanya-caritamrta. When Raghunath Das Goswami meets one of the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, when he meets Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in Jagannath Puri and comes to stay there, he's run away from home, from a very wealthy home, very comfortable home. He's run away from Bengal, comes all the way to Orissa, to Jagannath Puri, meets to spend time to be with Sri Chaitanya. And he goes through this process of giving himself fully to Mahaprabhu, of developing a sense of renunciation, of vairagya. And he starts off by eating very, very little, right? He's fasting, he's eating little, he's trying to control his senses. And then he goes from eating little to just simply begging for his food. Going first to the place where they distribute free food in Jagannath Puri temple. You can still go to this place and accept prasad, and takes his food there. And then he decides that's way too comfortable to go to a place where the hungry are fed and eat food. That's too easy, it's too dependable. So instead he stands at the door, the gate to the temple. And in the evening when the pujaris and the priests leave, they give them something from the Lord's Mahaprasad. And he stands there begging for his meal. And then he decides that that is also way too dependent upon others. And so he goes to the place where food is thrown out and starts to eat food off the ground, washes it and eats the food that has been left over from others. Each one of these steps, as Raghunath Das Goswami goes deeper and deeper into that sense of renunciation for which he will one day become very famous in our sampradaya. Each one of those, it's amazing to see the dynamic between Sri Chaitanya and Raghunath Das Goswami. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is always keeping tabs on how Raghunath is doing. He's entrusted Raghunath Das Goswami to the care of Swarup Damodar. And he keeps asking him, how is Raghu doing? And every time he hears of Raghunath Das Goswami, he gives him confidence. He appreciates, he encourages him. He says, this is wonderful what he is doing. His renunciation is glorious. And then he gently pushes him to do more. And Raghunath Das Goswami does more. And Sri Chaitanya encourages him again and says, this is wonderful. How wonderful is Raghunath Das Goswami? And then he encourages him to do more. And then Raghunath Das Goswami Raghunath starts to call Sri Chaitanya every evening, or once a month to his home for prasad. And Mahaprabhu accepts and says, this is wonderful, using money that Raghunath gets from his father. He says, this is so delicious. This is wonderful. Thank you for inviting me. And yet when Raghunath stops doing this, because he stops accepting that money from home, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is pleased even more. We see this dynamic taking place. Confidence, humility, confidence, humility. Encouraging Raghu to improve, giving him the confidence. You can do it. You can do more, but you can do it. Right? And that dynamic between encouragement and gentle pushing forward. Right? This is that persistent improvement. This is the characteristic of mentor-mentee relationships, especially as we find them in Sri Caitanya-caritamrta between Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Raghunath Das Goswami, similarly between Mahaprabhu and Sanatan Goswami, and so on. Now, once we have this trust, right, this trust is built. The mentor is someone who helps in that journey, the hero's journey that you might remember from yesterday. The mentor is someone who helps the student cross the threshold. That is, take a step in their life that is going to change their world, that is going to transform how they see themselves and how they see the world around them, how they see their capacity to affect the world. That step, as I've mentioned, is risky and it's challenging. We see this with Mrigari. He tells Narada Muni, how can I break my bow? This is the way I support my family. This is the way I support my children. In Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Sanatan Goswami, you remember that blanket that Sanatan Goswami had gotten on his way to Mahaprabhu? This is a man who had given up everything. He gave up his very cushy job in the Nawab's government. He was one of the top leaders, the keeper of all his fortunes. He gave up literally a boatload of money. He gave up his assistant and his servant. And he comes to Mahaprabhu unkempt, not having anything to his name, and sits outside his door. Except he has one thing, a nice blanket, a woolen blanket that he's received from a relative. That's all. And Mahaprabhu keeps looking askance at that blanket, keeps giving him the look and saying, yeah, he doesn't say anything actually, he just looks. And Sanatan Goswami is sharp enough where he recognizes this and goes to the bank of the Ganges, the Ganga in Benares, finds a poor man who has a torn blanket and says, can I exchange with you, please? And when he comes back with that torn blanket, Mahaprabhu is overjoyed. He's so happy. But that moment, right, that moment is, of all the things that Sanatan Goswami gives up, that moment is emphasized so much by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami because it's a crossing of a threshold, right? It's that one last attachment that Mahaprabhu is telling Sanatan, your life, your past life is gone. It's done. It's over. You have crossed into a new world. You've become a new person, Sanatan. Go shave, bathe yourself, give up that blanket and come back and join me. We can only imagine how difficult that must have been. Not because a blanket is so valuable, but because that one thing represented the last connection to home, the last connection to family, the last connection to that glorious life, and it was a glorious life that he had left behind. So with Mrigari, with Raghunath Das, with Sanatan Goswami, each time there's this moment of crossing. And often at that moment, the mentor offers a gift, a little something to signify that transition, to say, you've now crossed the threshold, you're now entering a new life. For Sanatan Goswami, it was an embrace that was full of tears on both sides. They bathed each other with tears. A welcoming, that embrace was a welcoming into the fold of Mahaprabhu's intimate circle of associates. For Raghunath Das Goswami, you remember that gift that Mahaprabhu gave him? So special. It was a Govardhan Shila and a necklace of gunja berries. And Krishnadas Kaviraj says that when he received that gift, he understood. He understood something. It was a little thing, but he understood, Raghunath Das Goswami, that with the Shila, with that stone, he was receiving shelter at the foot of Govardhan. That was going to be his home. And with that necklace of red berries, the Gunja Mala, that Gunja beads are so dear to Srimati Radharani, he was receiving shelter at the lotus feet of Srimati Radharani. There's often a gift connected to that. In our own lives, that moment is often characterized by the ceremony of Diksha, the initiation ceremony, where we receive the beads and a name. Again, things that financially have very little value, but signify a very important moment of crossing the threshold in a devotee's life, of becoming a new person. Now, in the movie versions of this journey and this moment of meeting the mentor, of crossing the threshold, of getting a gift, and the fear that's associated, the challenge that's associated with that process. In the storyline versions, these moments are often dramatic. There's a lot of grand music, and there's the audience knows that something big is going to happen. Often, not always, but often. But there's two things that I want to mention here, just to kind of bring this down to earth to our own lives, is that this moment, doesn't have to be a moment. It doesn't have to be a singular, transformative experience. There's often no background music to it in our own lives. There's no crescendo. Beethoven's Fifth Symphony doesn't play at this point, right? It's often not even noticed by the person who's going through it. That's one thing. And the other thing is that it doesn't have to be a single person either. Meeting the mentor, that's in the singular. But it can very well be in the plural as well. We can have multiple mentors in our lives. Gurus who give us initiation, a guru who gives us diksha, many gurus who give us shiksha or teaching, ashram gurus who teach us how to be grihastas or brahmacharis, who guide us in our way in life, gurus who teach us our trade, our profession, and how to do that with honesty and sincerity and do it well. There can be many mentors. And meeting those mentors can be a gradual, unheralded moment in our lives. If I think back to my own life, I can see how it's been shaped, formed, transformed by the kindness, the determination of so many mentors, of multiple people who I've met and learned from over the years. And in very few of those instances, maybe none, did I know that I was meeting that person. Did I know that I was even undergoing a moment of crossing a threshold? It's only when I look back in life that I think that was a crucial moment. My own spiritual master, Hanuman Swami, I met him before I can remember, right? He used to come to Boise, Idaho when I was a child. And I grew in a relationship with someone who I didn't know was even a guru, or that he would one day be my Diksha guru, or that, he would shape my perspectives in such important ways. Other mentors I've met in life, similar situation. Two crucial people who have been mentors in my life. One of them is here, Anuttama Prabhu, and the other, Shonaka Rishi Prabhu, who is the director of the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies. I met them both at the same event, on the same occasion. I was 12 years old and going to one of the first, maybe the first, ISKCON Communications Conference in Los Angeles that Anuttama Prabhu was organizing. I was 12, I think, and I was leaving home for the first time on my own. It was my first travel on my own. It was a big deal for me, but a big deal only because I was traveling on my own. What I didn't realize is how big of a deal it would be in other ways. I met Anuttama Prabhu there for the first time. I met Shonaka Rishi Prabhu there for the first time. I met Shonaka on a bus. We were all going to the Los Angeles Times to meet the religion reporter there and learn about what it means to talk to a religion reporter, what their interests are. I learned so much from that whole conference. But what I didn't know is that when I got onto that bus, Shonaka Rishi Prabhu climbed onto that bus and happened to sit on the seat right next to me. That meeting ended up leading to a relationship that led to my study at Oxford, that led to a lifelong mentor-mentee relationship that transformed my life entirely. It was a crossing the threshold moment that was unheralded. I had no clue I was going through that. Shonaka Rishi Prabhu claims that he knew exactly what he was doing. I don't know, but who knows, right? What could have happened at that moment? And yet it was one of those moments, right? In more than one occasion. It gave birth to the relationship I have today with Anuttama Prabhu as well. My meeting my parents was something that I certainly don't remember, right? And yet they've been mentors my entire life in such important ways. So again, just to bring this down to earth, is that if we're not living the fairy tale, if we're not living in a movie set, sometimes these moments can be unexpected, they can be unheralded, they don't happen in a blaze of glory. And it's only later on in life we look back and we think, yes, Krishna had a hand there, right? Brahmanda Brahmite Kon Bhagyavan Jeev, Guru Krishna Prasade Pai Lata Beach. That was a moment of seed giving, right? A seed was planted in my heart in that moment. I met a guru, I met a mentor, I met a teacher who I didn't recognize at the time, perhaps who didn't recognize me at the time. And yet it was meant to happen. Guru Krishna Prasade Pai. Krishna had a plan there in that moment. Okay, so that's from the side of meeting the mentor, which all of us, I hope, have done at some level in our lives already. But let's think of this now from the other side, which is being a mentor. Let's start with the obvious question, which is being a mentor, is even talking about it, perhaps even wanting to be in that role, is that arrogance? Is that just pride speaking? Do we even deserve to think ourselves as mentors? Much less gurus. That word, that idea seems so anathema to the Vaishnav sense of humility, of no, I'm always the servant. And yet it's precisely because we're always the servant that we will one day be called to serve as mentor. It's not so much should we do it, but what do we do when we have to do it? The reason for that is because it's an unavoidable feature of human life. If one is a reasonable person and of sufficient experience, it's going to happen. Someone is going to seek us out and ask us to be their mentor. At that point, we have a choice. We can refuse that opportunity, or we can try to do our best and embrace it. But it's going to happen, right? If we're halfway reasonable as human beings and we've been around some time, it's going to happen. There is another soul, maybe many souls in this world, who will look at us and say, that person is worthy of seeking advice, of guiding me. That person can help me. Perhaps in their ashram, perhaps in their trade, perhaps in their spiritual life. But one way or the other, we're going to be called to be a mentor. And there's 4 things that I want to point out. When that happens, when we're asked to step into that role, there's 4 things that I think they're important to remember. And 4 because there's so many things, but given our limited time, there are just 4 I want to point out in quick succession. The first thing we want to remember when we're asked to be a mentor is that it's not about us. It's about us being asked to do a service, a seva. When Mahaprabhu calls us, Jare dekho tare koho Krishna upadesh, amar ajnai guru haya taro edesh. When he says this verse, he is speaking to a simple householder, someone who wanted to follow behind him. And he says, no, you stay here and be guru for your people, for your community, for those who might ask you, for those who look up to you. Stay here. Amar ajnai guru haya taro edesh. And in this desha, in this place, in this community, in this village, you be a mentor. And Srila Prabhupada says in the purport to that verse, Mahaprabhu is speaking to all of us. He's given us a call to be a mentor. So it's not about us, right? I remember when the first time my mother asked me to give class in the Boise temple. I don't know how old I was, maybe 10, maybe 11. She saw something in me. She thought he should give class. And, it was a family-run temple, but large enough where we had people from the broader community coming. And I remember panicking, just being really scared and really out of place. I gave her every argument on the planet. I said, I don't have experience. I can't do this. I'm too young to do this. Why would anyone want to listen to a 10-year-old? And at the end of it all, she worked through all of my concerns carefully. But at the end of it all, she said, Ravi, you think this is about yourself, don't you? You think that when you sit on that Vyasasana, it's all about you. People are going to look at you and think about you and who you are and how young you are and how capable you are or not. But this isn't about you. It's about Krishna. You're there to talk about Krishna. You're just the medium for that. And those words have always stayed with me through my entire life. To this day, when I'm asked to speak to an audience I've never spoken to before, or to a crowd of a size that I've never spoken to before, or on a subject that I'm not confident about, I remind myself, Ravi, this is not about you. This is not about you. This is about Krishna. Krishna has placed this opportunity before you. He thinks you're the right person to do it. Whether you succeed or fail, how well you do it is not the question. You have to do it, and you have to do your best. And that helps me get through those panicky moments, which even after all these years of speaking still happen. The first day of class at university, when I'm first entering that classroom and going to meet my students for the semester, after all these years, 15 years of full-time student teaching, I'm still nervous on that first day. There's still a panic, a flutter in my stomach, going, I don't know what it's going to be like. I don't know if I can do this. And I've taught that course numbers of times. I've met these students, other students so many times, and yet it's always there, right? It's always there. It's natural. Being a mentor is scary. But yeah, we have to remind ourselves it's not about us. And it's that humility that helps us recognize that whatever Krishna sends our way, I will accept that. And if that comes with some position, if it comes with some honor, I will accept that too. I will accept that too. But I will remember that Krishna knows me in private and he will reward me in private. Right? Krishna knows me in private, he will reward me in private. I'm not fooling, I can fool many people. Academics are really good at making themselves think, making themselves show like they know things that they don't know anything about. Right? We develop a certain skill at that, at conferences and in lectures. It's part of the whole show of being a scholar. But Krishna knows who I actually am, right? Krishna knows, and Krishna will reward me in private based on who I actually am and what I had to put into there and how honest I was in my process of being a mentor, right? So we take the opportunity Krishna gives us, we take whatever honor and perks Krishna sends along with that opportunity. It's unavoidable, right? Being a mentor comes with certain, position, prestige, whatever. Certain people will bow before us. They will touch our feet. They will thank us in gratitude. And we have to accept that as genuine because that's part of the relationship between a mentor and a mentee. It's an expression of their affection. Vaisheshika Prabhu gave me some really good advice about this one day, at one time, because I've always been so uncomfortable with that aspect. And he said, look, this is part of the relationship, but you need to be clear who you are, right? Who you are. Yes, whatever comes that way, it creates a picture of us, but we know who we are. So that's the first thing, right? We remember it's not about us. And we keep a very honest understanding of who we are. And our own mentors help with that, because remember what the mentor does? The mentor brings us face to face with who we are. And so we can go back to our own experience of being mentored, those own moments where we've been humbled by our teachers and our gurus and think, yep, someone knows who I am. Right? Someone knows who I am. I'm not that glorious person the world thinks I am. This is who I actually am. And that keeps us humble and helps us recognize it's not about me. So it's not about me. Second thing, we have to know our limitations, even as we embark on becoming a mentor. What are our limitations? The finest example I find of this is in third canto Srimad Bhagavatam, the meeting between Vidura and Uddhava. So Vidura is on pilgrimage and he's seeking for a mentor. He's looking for guidance. And he comes to Uddhav. And Uddhav is Krishna's friend. He's from Dwarka. Who could be a better teacher? Vidura wants to learn about Krishna. And here is Krishna's intimate friend who's before him. And so he comes before Uddhav and he asks questions about Krishna. And Uddhav responds in a very beautiful, very heartfelt way. This is one of the most beautiful things in third canto is you find essentially a snapshot of 10th canto. Bhagavatam will provide Krishna Lila in snapshots in multiple occasions. And this is a really heartrending memory of Krishna that Uddhav gives. That famous verse, Aho Bakiyam Stanakalukutam, where he's remembering how merciful Krishna is, that he would make a witch, Putana, his own mother, give her the position of mother, even though she set out to kill him, even as she gave Krishna her breasts to drink milk from. He marvels at Krishna's mercy. That verse is part of this discussion. So it's a wonderful discussion. But in the end, Uddhav sends Vidura away. He says, you should go to Maitreya, who lives not too far from here. Maitreya Muni is a great sage, and he can teach you everything you want to know about Krishna and Krishna's glories. And Prabhupada explains in the purport, when he's sending him away, pointing him to someone else who would be a more appropriate mentor. He says, he tells us why. He says two things we can surmise. One is that Uddhav is much younger than Vidura. Vidura is much his senior. And he says, Prabhupada says, Krishna never appreciates when we cross proper etiquette. Someone who is so young should not be in the role of teaching someone who is so senior. It's just not the right relationship. It's not going to work well. Uddhav knows this. He knows his limitations. And in this case, it's age. And he stays within those limitations. He's going to be teaching someone who's very senior, right? But then the other thing that we can surmise from that context is that Uddhav is not in a state to function as a systematic teacher, to answer all the systematic questions that Vidur is going to have. Uddhav is so overwhelmed with separation from Krishna after Krishna's departure. Any mention of Krishna puts him in a state of ecstasy, causes tears of joy to flow from his eyes. His voice chokes up. He cannot teach. He just doesn't have enough of a distance from his subject to be able, from the topic at hand, to be able to teach properly. Every time he thinks of Krishna, he chokes up and stops in his tracks. He knows he's not going to be able to get through the class. And so he pulls out. Right? So Uddhav knows his limitations. It has nothing to do with the fact that Uddhava is not qualified, that he's not an amazing person. It has nothing to do with the fact that Vidura is not willing to learn from Uddhava, right? Again, it doesn't have to do with us. It's the fact that I am not suited for this seva. And so he knows that I need to send him on. So as mentors, we need to know our limitations, right? This level of seva, I'm not going to be able to handle. My humility is not sufficient to handle this kind of worship from others. I'm going to put a stop to it. We have to know our own capacity, our own ability, what we can accept and digest without getting a bad stomach. And that's not easy. It takes a lot of honesty. It takes recognizing ourselves. So becoming a mentor, it continues that process of self-discovery. We realize that was too much for me to handle. I don't think I can keep my head on straight if I keep doing that. Or yes, I can do this. This is a capacity I didn't realize I had. Krishna knew I had, but this is a service I'm really excited about. Right? So we continue to learn more about ourselves. Third, when we become a mentor, we remember that we have to remain focused on the mentee. It's not about us, it's about the mentee, the person, the student. And we start from where they are at. This is one of the cardinal principles of being a teacher in any context. We always begin with where the student is. One mantra that we often get in the university context is you teach the students you have, not the students you wish you had. You teach the students you have, not the students you wish you had. You begin from where your student is at. What they need to hear, not what you want to say. Yes, I may have had this great realization last night, but if my student is not ready to hear that realization, it will not only go beyond them. They will not only miss the point, but I could even do great harm in the process. The story of Mrigari is one that I love in so many levels. It's so wonderful, but particularly for this reason. When Narada Muni meets Mrigari, what's the first instruction that he gives Mrigari after Mrigari panics, when he faces himself? What's the first thing that his mentor tells him? He says, kill the animals fully. Now, imagine taking that statement, that instruction from Narada Muni out of context. If you didn't know anything about this story, what would you think? A great sage, a great devotee of the Lord, one of the most wonderful Vaishnavas we know, is teaching someone to kill animals? Telling someone, kill the animals fully? Those words sound terrible coming from Narada Muni's mouth, out of context, right? Kill the animals. It's not what you would expect a Vaishnava to say. And yet, in Mrigari's situation, killing the animals fully represents a step toward Krishna. It represents an advancement for Mrigari. And I'm sure what Narada Muni would actually like to tell him is, don't even kill an ant. What he would actually like to tell him is, give up everything and go chant the holy name 24 hours a day. And he will tell him that very soon in the story, but that's not where he starts, right? He starts with where Mrigari is at. And Mrigari needs to hear, kill the animals fully. Don't half kill them. So we start with where the student is at. It's about them. And again, one could give dozens of examples from the Upanishads, from Bhagavatam, from Caitanya-caritamrta, of teachers meeting their students where they are at and saying, this is where I'm going to begin. This is how I'm going to teach you. And then eventually getting them to where the teacher wants them to be, to where they see that person's potential is at, but helping them get there gradually at their pace. In the teaching world, this is called student-driven learning. But that's a new term. You can find it all the way back in the Upanishads, where teachers come to students and say, I want to learn the Vedas. I want to learn about the self. And the teacher begins in very fundamental, very foundational ways. Each student in a different way. Okay, number 3. And the last I'm going to mention very briefly, which is we mentor through our character, through our habits of thought, our modes of behavior, our perspective. That's what we don't say, but that's what our mentees, our students, hear the most loudly from us. Less important are the brilliant philosophical points that we can offer or the solutions we can give to their lives. If I think back in my own life, my relationship with their mentors, with my mentors, almost universally, they have been there at some of the most crucial moments in my life. And almost always, they are not the ones who have come up with the solution for that moment or the next step. That Krishna made clear. It wasn't that, it was their perspective on the future. It was their perspective on the moment. It was the way they thought about it, the way they responded to it, their behavior. That was the source of inspiration. That was the source of strength. Yes, we don't want to devalue the thought process, the philosophical points, the solutions. Those are useful. Those are important. But it fundamentally begins with our character. Prabhupada says this over and over again. He says, a teacher who smokes cannot teach their students not to smoke. First achar, then prachar. If the teacher is not of sufficient character, it doesn't matter how well they know the subject. The source is more important than the content. That's a fundamental principle of Vaishnava education. The source is more important than the content. Because without a trustworthy source, without trust, there is no truth. Without truth, There is no confidence. Without confidence, there is no relationship. Remember that sequence we went through earlier. In modern parlance, this is called a hidden curriculum in a teacher's syllabus. What you actually say you're going to teach is not the most important thing you teach. It's the hidden curriculum. When a teacher stands up in front of a class and says, I'm going to teach you now about the cardinal pillars of this major religion, as I do in my classes, what they're actually going to remember is not the pillars of that religion. That's what they're most likely to forget after the final exam is over. What they're most likely to remember is how I speak about those religions. Does he speak about them with respect? Is he able to be critical and yet empathetic at the same time in that moment? Is he able to speak about people's difficulties with compassion? Those are the things that the students remember. And they hopefully, I hope, end up modeling in their own lives, in their own dinner conversations, and at their own workplaces when they encounter people of different religious traditions. So in modern parlance, it's called a hidden curriculum, that which isn't obvious, but is nevertheless very loud to your students. It's not explicit, but very powerful. So it's our character. We mentor through our character. So these 4 things, right, I wanted to point out, and then I hope in our discussion, there are other things that you will bring out in terms of what it means to be mentored and what it means to mentor others in terms of those characteristics. There's actually so much that can be said, and the topic is limitless. Guru Tattva is Balaram Tattva, right? We understand that the Guru is a representative, an embodiment of Lord Balaram, and Lord Balaram is limitless. There's no end to his glories. And so one could speak about this topic, as our Shastras do, endlessly. And yet we don't have endless time. And so I'm going to stop right here and leave some time for questions, comments, realizations, points that you would like to add to this discussion. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Radhika Ramana Prabhu. I could see so many comments out there in the chat section where everyone was mentioning wonderful presentations, so insightful. And I personally definitely, I loved it. How, when you started saying, meeting the mentor, giving the example of Hanuman, Arjuna, and how Guru instills confidence and humility, explaining about Tadvidhi Pranipaten Pariprashten Sevaya, Updekshanti Te Jnanam Jnananyas Asadarshana. And then, coming to the example of Raghunath Das Goswami, Sanatan Goswami, the blanket, which was the last connection to their glorious life, and how, when we cross these thresholds, the mentors give us the gift. Like with Sanatan Goswami, it was an embrace. And that epiphany moment probably is not supported by any background music or any dramatic. But when we look back, we realize that Krishna had a hand there, and how Brahman Brahmite Kono Bhagyavan Jeev, Guru Krishna Prasade Pai Bhakti Lata Beach. And then, taking us from the journey to meeting the mentor to being a mentor. That how Mahaprabhu is speaking to all of us via a householder, that Jare Dekho Tare Kaho Krishna Updesh, and giving your personal example of how when you were 10 years old, and then, you were been told by a mother to give a lecture, and you realize it's not about you, it's about Krishna. And when we become a mentor, we realize that we need to begin with where the students are, and you teach the students you have, not the students you wish, and ultimately telling us about how Guru Tattva is the Balram, Tattva, and explaining that. The presentation was so systematically organized by you. I'm sure it would indelibly be, be embarked in the hearts and minds of all the viewers out here. And I definitely open for the questions out there for everyone. So can we have the questions right now directed to Radhika Ramana Prabhu? Thank you so much, Prabhuji, for this presentation once again.
That was a wonderful summary, Vallabhai Prabhu. Appreciate that very much.
I am sure a lot of people have their own summaries and they have a lot of questions to ask. So if you have any questions, I would request to raise the hand or put it in the chat section. Okay, so we have the question by Anutama Prabhu. Prabhu, to you.
All right, Radhika Prabhu, thank you. It was really insightful presentation. And I think I put in a comment. I think this is really the kind of Sangha we like to have with the mantra. We strive for that, to bring new perspectives and deeper thoughts. And I took notes. My wife is in the next room going, why can't I listen to this? Why can't I listen? I said, no, I'll take notes. I'll share them with you later, so, but I'm thinking maybe this isn't appropriate for the first question, but, we try to have some really honest discussions here. So I was struck about your fourth point, that, the mentor, the guru, the teacher teaches as much through their character and their behavior as what they say. And, reminds me how in the first canon of the Bhagavatam, Prabhupada talks about there's the book Bhagavat, and then there's the devotee Bhagavat. So, sometimes we get into controversial things, and I think they're controversial in part because they impact our society in big ways. So there are conversations out there. I've sat in rooms and heard these conversations. When we look at Prabhupada as the mentor of the whole movement, our founder Acharya, it's what he put in the books. Don't look at what he did. In fact, what he did doesn't apply for today. You just have to look at the books and, Prabhupada said this, Prabhupada did this, Prabhupada went here, went there. That doesn't matter. Just go to the books. And I'm just wondering, because you think about things in such deep ways, if you'd care to reflect your thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very thoughtful point, Anutama Prabhu, and thank you for bringing that up. And I think it is very much a characteristic of our tradition going, well, right to the beginning, that person and content go hand in hand. But really, if I was forced to choose one as more important, which is not a good thing to do, but if I were forced, then it really would be the person more than the content when it comes to learning from a mentor. Because we live in a society that is more and more content driven. There's really no shortage of content. Thanks to the internet, we can Google anything and we can get all kinds of data on just about anything we want. The struggle is really to make sense of that data, to understand it, to digest it, to know what that means in our own lives and how to act upon it. And that's where the person is so crucial. We see as time, as the world progresses, content becomes more and more divorced from the person itself. So, websites rarely have the author written on them. We don't know who's writing. And the person, a place like Wikipedia, for example, intentionally devalues the author with the idea that it's the content that's most important. We know this in academia, and so we tell our students Wikipedia is not an appropriate source to cite because you don't know the person behind it. There's no qualification that's present there. So I think it's natural that society drives us in the direction, today's world drives us in the direction of focusing on content, on ideas, on points, and divorcing them from the source. But the Vaishnava tradition pulls us again and again and again in the direction of saying, reconnect the content with the person, reconnect the content with the person from where it's emerging. And there's that beautiful verse by Maharaj Yudhishthira in Mahabharata, Tarko pratishtha shrutayo vibhinna. He says the content is so confusing. Everyone says, Naiko rishiryasya matam pramanam. Every scripture says something different. Mahajano yena gata sapantha. But when I see how the Mahajans walk, I know how to walk behind them. I know the path, right? And he speaks specifically in terms of the path. It's the behavior of the Mahajan that is opening the doors to help me understand the scripture. So text, there's a circle here. This is called a hermeneutical circle. The text helps us understand who the person is. What characteristics should I be looking for in a mentor, in the Bhagavata? Who is the Bhagavata? Who is the guru? The text helps us understand the person. The person helps us then understand the text, the content. The content connects us with the right person. The person then helps us understand the content. The books connect us to Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada then helps us understand the books. Shastra connects us to Guru. Guru helps us understand Shastra. This looks like a circular reasoning, and circular reasoning is considered to be a bad thing, but not in this case. This is called a hermeneutical circle. And each time you go around the circle, you return with deeper understanding. So that each time I read scripture, I better understand who the Bhagavata, the person Bhagavata is. And each time I look at Prabhupada's life and reflect upon his life, as we did for his disappearance day recently, we come to better understand scripture and who Krishna is and who the Bhagavatam is. And that cycle repeats itself endlessly so that we enter deeper and deeper into this. So person, content, these two things go together, hand in hand, and help us go deeper into each other.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nitya Prabhu. In fact, this was a very insightful question and definitely cleared a lot of doubts for all of us. And I used to always believe content is the king. You know, everyone would say that in today's world, and how you beautifully explained that definitely content might be the king, but then the Vaishnava culture tells us to go back to the source and how both of them go hand in hand. So we have another question by Ravi Rawat Prabhu. Prabhuji, please go ahead.
Hare Krishna, Radhika Ramana Prabhuji. Thank you so much for this wonderful session. I have a question. Like I was thinking when you were giving, you're talking that when one gives mentorship, he has to mentor a mentee by looking into his shoes, right? Like at the level what he is. So sometimes, Prabhu, what I feel like a role of a mentor becomes difficult when there is a fear of losing a mentee. It's not for the personal, I'm saying not for the personal, that I have got so many mentees under me, not like that, but sometimes because that person may not get, Krishna consciousness. So in that way, with that perspective, how to overcome that fear? Like we cannot be guru, but yeah, sometimes our colleagues wants to know about, Krishna consciousness. And that time we take a role of a mentor, a little bit, a sort of mentor. But there is also a fear of losing a mentee. So how to overcome that?
Yes, very wonderful question. Thank you, Ravi Prabhu. Yeah, let's think back to the hero's journey, right? The hero passes through that stage of meeting the mentor, and the mentor is always with them because the mentor gives them something that they carry with them throughout their journey. But the mentee has to be able to go on their journey, right? I think our fear emerges in such contexts because we sometimes forget that we have just one role to play in the mentee's journey, in the student's journey. Krishna has allowed our paths to cross because we have something to contribute to this person's life. And it may turn out that after a certain point, someone else needs to pick up where we left off, where we have offered what we can, and we have done the best we can, and they will carry that, and they will carry us with them. But now it's someone else whose turn is to help, just like Uddhav and Maitreya, right? Uddhav gave him something which he carried with him. It's so beautiful what Uddhav gave him. And yet Uddhav knew it's time to now move him along, right? And so sometimes that fear is born because we want to be part of that journey longer than the mentee needs it or wants it. Or sometimes that fear is born because we have certain preconceived goals for our mentee. This is my measure of success, right? You're going to be successful. I'm going to be successful as, it's not about you actually. It becomes, I'm going to be successful as a mentor if I get this person initiated. Then I can add this person to my list of successful mentees, people I have successfully mentored. But that's our goal, right? And it's a nice goal. There's nothing wrong with that goal, but it's our goal. And we may not realize that this person needs to move on in their journey And in this lifetime, this may be all the role that I have to play, and that's okay. And who knows where that journey will take me. Just think about the mentees, the students that we have received in our lives. No doubt they were not starting from ground zero, right? When we received them into our lives, they had already made progress, sometimes significant progress. And sometimes we get to take them to the point that we want to take them, to the finish line, and other times we don't. We have to say, you go on, and it's okay. I've done my role. And we have to take pride in the fact that we could serve this devotee in this way, in this capacity, and have the humility to let them go when needed. Sometimes when mentor-mentee relationships become too possessive, it can become a very difficult, sometimes even a toxic relationship. When a mentor is not willing to let go, or when a mentee is not willing to let go. Sometimes the mentor needs to go push them out of the nest and say, time to fly away. Come on, you gotta go, right? You can't hang around with me forever. I'm not gonna help you at every little step. And sometimes, sadly, it's the mentor who needs to be told, time to let go. Let the mentee move on, right? Your job with them is done, at least for now. So that takes humility and wisdom on both sides, but especially on the side of the mentor, to give up that fear that you're describing and say, it's okay. I did my job. I did the best I could. Now, this is this person's journey, and they have to find their own way. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, Radhika Ramana Prabhu. That marks a very special point there, that sometimes we need to realize this was my role at this moment or for this lifetime, and then move on. Narad Muni Prabhu has a question here from Vancouver. Narad Muni Prabhu, can you hear us?
Yeah, Hare Krishna Prabhuji, thank you very much for a nice class. Analyzing the situations in our Shastra with so much critical points, understand them better. I really appreciated the way you give the analysis of so many situations. But only one question, like you say, when we should be ready for being a mentor. But we see in our own parampara system, like for example, Bhakti Siddhantaji went to Gaur Kishodas Babaji Maharaj. He was not going to give him initiation. He had to basically plead him. The other example, I think, I believe Narottam Das Thakur, he had to clean the place where his guru used to do the excreta. So why these situations happen when we say that we should be ready to become mentor, but we see all these examples. There are more than one examples in our own parampara. How do you explain that?
Yes, wonderful question, Admani Prabhu. Thank you so much. Actually, when Gaur Kishore Das Babaji kept turning away Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he was actually functioning already at that point as a mentor. Sometimes a mentor needs to raise the bar and ask the student to jump over in order to encourage, to build, to inspire the student's determination even more. Say someone writes to me in the university context and says, I would like to do a master's in religious studies under your guidance. What's the first thing that I'm going to ask? What's your preparation like? Do you have a bachelor's degree? Please send me a writing sample. Why? That's not because I'm not willing to serve as a mentor to that person, but because there's a bar that needs to be reached to cross for that student to flourish in this particular relationship. So in other words, when a person serves as Diksha Guru, there's first a step of serving as Shiksha Guru. And before that, often a step of serving as Vartma Pradarshaka Guru, of saying, you're not quite ready for Diksha, or I need to know that you're ready for Diksha, but I can certainly help you develop the determination to take Diksha. I can certainly guide you on that path. So we should see that relationship between that exchange between Gaur Kishore Das Babaji and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati as the beginning of the mentor relationship, as the first step, where he says, let's see your determination. Here's the bar, jump over it. And then I'm ready to enter this relationship. So mentoring can come in many different ways. It doesn't always come in the form of explicit or overt acceptance. Sometimes it can come in the form of setting boundaries and clear lines and tests and just a sense of preparation that's needed within the context of that relationship.
Yeah. Thank you, Prabhu.
And
Thank
that's
you.
not also like, how come Guru Das Babaji Maharaj didn't have many more disciples? Such a highly advanced Vaishnava.
Every one of us needs to know ourselves well in order to know how Krishna wants us to serve and what's the best way in which we can serve. Being the number of mentees we have has no correlation with our qualification, with our advancement, with our devotion, or with our value in Krishna's lives. Sometimes we place so much emphasis on numbers. This person has so many mentees. Their Bhakti Vriksha, they've got 5 Bhakti Vrikshas under them, whereas this person only has 2 Bhakti Vrikshas they're looking after. That's not the measure. Someone's ability, capacity, desire, whatever it may be in their life, we have to know ourselves well enough to recognize, I can genuinely take care of 1 person, or 5 people, or 10, or I can take care of 10,000, whatever might be that number. It depends on us knowing ourselves well enough to recognize how we can serve Krishna well, and knowing Krishna well enough to tell us how Krishna wants us to serve. So again, it goes back to that sense of honesty, recognizing who we are, our abilities, and divorcing it from some preconceived notion of success that we might have in our own lives. If we can mentor 1 person successfully, that is glorious in Krishna's eyes.
Thank you very much for the nice explanation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Prabhu. Thank you, Prabhu. Prabhu, you briefly mentioned about Shiksha Guru and Diksha Guru. If I can quickly ask a question there. Can someone have more attachment with the Shiksha Guru compared to the Diksha Guru?
Prabhupada says that generally the primary Shiksha Guru becomes the Diksha Guru, but not always, right? Not always. The relationships in our Sampradaya are founded on instruction, on Shiksha. That's the basis. You know, if we read the stories of Caitanya-caritamrta, of Srimad Bhagavatam, the deepest relationships of mentor and mentee, of Shiksha relationships, are rarely connected with Diksha. At least we don't hear about them. We can guess, maybe some Diksha ceremony happened, but that's not what's highlighted in the story. We don't see that moment showing up, right? And this goes back to the point of us having certain preconceived notions of what counts as success in our serving as a mentor. But that moment is not highlighted in the scriptures very often. Occasionally it is. But the deepest relationships that we have, that we see, are Shiksha relationships. And that's not a betrayal of anyone, right? Shiksha relationships should be many. Shiksha gurus are many. They should be deep. There's nothing that is wrong or a betrayal of our Diksha guru, anything of that nature, right? Because Krishna gives us Shiksha in so many different ways, in so many different shapes, depending on who that person is and what our needs are.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much for that answer, Prabhuji. Vrindavan Prabhu has been wanting to ask a question since a while now. Prabhuji, you are on mute.
Hare Krishna, good to see you.
Good to see you, Prabhu.
That's such a beautiful talk. Thank you so much. You mentioned the Brahmanda Brahmite Kon Bhagyavan Jeev, Guru Krishna Prasade by Bhakti Lata Bij, how by the mercy of Guru and Krishna, the person gets the bij, the seed of bhakti. And I'm wondering, because Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur talks about some of the gifts that the Guru gives. And one is that he spoke about that the guru gives a family, gives sangha, those around the guru. And then also he speaks about how the guru gives the bhakti lata bij. And I've heard devotees say different things about where the bhakti, like that initial seed is given. We have the adau shraddha. So like that, oftentimes that little bit of faith might come before one actually meets guru. So I know this might be a little bit of a technical point, but I'm wondering if you have any clarity on how and where that initial seed comes from. Is it guru? Is it not guru? The devotees.
So it's a wonderful question, Prabhu. And honestly, I don't know the answer to your question. All I can say is that this is actually a matter of major debate in our sampradaya, where the seed comes from and whether even the seed is given or pre-existent, whether the seed is given or only awakened. So there's also the statement, for example, Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sadhya Kabunai, Shravanadi Shuddha Chitte Karayo Odai, that Krishna Prema is always there in the heart. It's not something foreign to us. And Prabhupada emphasized that verse many, many times, right? How it's just awakened, Shravanadi, by the process of hearing. And yet also we hear that the Bhakti Lata Bij is a gift. It's given to us, it's placed within our heart. The soil must be fertile, but it's given and grown. So whether the seed is planted or the seed is only awakened, it's dormant and awakened. And if it is planted, at what point it is planted or at what point it is awakened in that process. This is a matter of some debate in our sampradaya. And my own knowledge, technical knowledge, does not go far enough to be able to answer exactly when that seed is planted or awakened in the 8-step process of bhakti. Some of it is already there, adau shraddha, so it may come already. That seed may have been present by eating a sweet ball from a Sankirtan devotee on the street, and we may have developed that seed of bhakti. For others, it may come at a much later stage. I'm not entirely sure myself, so I'm sorry, I'm not able to answer that question with precision.
Thank you. I didn't know it was a debate, and it's good to know that it's not clear.
Yeah, there are others who have done nice research on that topic.
Thank you.
All right, so we have, okay, so I can take one more last question that I have in the chat from a while that says, how do we avoid imitating the mentor and not express our individuality in the capacity as mentors?
That's a great question. That's a really good question. It is natural for students, mentees, to craft themselves in the image of their teacher. Despite the focus on independent thinking that we cultivate even in the academic world, scholarship, academia, which focuses on being your own thinker, there are still sampradayas, lineages of teachers that come from specific mentors and scholars who have had students and placed them in different universities. This is a very natural phenomenon. We craft ourselves in the image of those whom we respect and those whom we look up to. So on the one hand, that's very natural, right? And whether we use the word imitation or we use the word following, right? The reality is the mentee, the student.
You'll be very satisfied with your bathroom. Oh man, take a look.
Let's check it out.
Yeah, take a look. Floors and
it's very natural that the mentor or mentee is going to try to behave like. This places a significant burden of responsibility on the mentor. And the responsibility is this: even as we know that our students will try to imitate us and hopefully the best qualities in us, to encourage, it becomes a responsibility of the teacher, the mentor, the guru, to encourage the student, the disciple, to express themselves as who they are in their service to the Lord. Because typically a mentee does not come with that wisdom on their own. If they do, that's wonderful. And that signifies a really amazing student, right? But it really is up to the teacher to help that student recognize that they need to find their way. They need to think for themselves, that especially as the relationship progresses. Initially, imitation is actually a really good thing, right? Children, for example, learn by imitation. And if they didn't imitate, they would not learn the basics of what it means to live life in this world. Imitation at that stage is really, really crucial to learning a language, to learning how to cleanse yourself, to learning how to behave in social situations. But at a certain point, it behooves the parent to encourage the child, the guru to encourage the disciple, the teacher to encourage the student to say, this is not worthy of imitating, or you have to find your way in life yourself. Find your path, find your service to Krishna and do that well. And I will encourage you and I will support you and I will guide you. But I expect you to exceed even more. And the wonderful example that comes to mind is, I hope I don't get the names mixed up here, but when Shyamananda Pandit seeks guidance from Srila Jiva Goswami, no, sorry, is it Narottam Das Thakur or Shyamananda Pandit? Shyamananda, who takes guidance from Jiva Goswami, and his guru is Hridaya Chaitanya, and he loves his guru, and yet Shyamananda, Hridaya Chaitanya Prabhu's mood, his rasa, is in the mood of a cowherd boy, right? He's worshiping the Lord in the mood of Sakhya Bhav. And Shyamananda is definitely in Madhurya. He's definitely in the mood of Manjari Seva. And so when he goes to Vrindavan and he meets Sri Jiva and his cohort with Narottam and Srinivasacharya, and he enters that mood, and Srimati Radharani gives him a special tilak on his forehead. This is a moment for Hridaya Chaitanya Thakur as well. He initially gets upset. And he says, he says, Jiva Goswami, Shripad Jiva, why are you doing this? He's my disciple. I guide him, and yet he's taking a whole different approach and a whole different mood and a whole different tilak marking. And he comes to realize the fact that his student has a different mood, a different relationship with the Lord than he does. And that does nothing to diminish their relationship as guru and teacher. That is not a threat to the relationship. That is a natural development in the relationship. But it's a challenge. It's a challenging moment both for guru and disciple at that time to recognize the fact. But because they're both mature, and especially Hridaya Chaitanya has such humility and such a gravity and wisdom, that he's able to accept that, to incorporate it, and not to feel insecure in that relationship, but to recognize, no, this is his path, this is his journey, right? And Shyamananda never gives up his deep gratitude, his relationship, and his continued guidance from his Diksha Guru, right? So it's a very dynamic thing and a very beautiful thing, but it really is a progress, right? Imitation is good in the beginning. It's how we learn. And then as we grow in that relationship, it's especially the teacher's responsibility to help the student find their own voice as they progress on the path of bhakti.